forgotten to teach. And this is a system called the 9 Rasas. The 9 Rasas. And this, we're going to have to kind of backtrack a little bit to because I've alluded to these 9 flavors several times, but we actually haven't gone in and explored them or talked about where they come from and how to use them even. So the last 2 sessions have really kind of had a snowball effect. We could even say the last 3 or 4. And we were working with the mythology of Shiva and how Shiva is the lord of the yogis, and how Shiva, part of his role as the yogi is because he is a god of destruction and transformation. And Shiva has this beautiful myth that involves the churning of the great ocean of milk, where when the serpent Vasuki spits up the venom and it threatens to dissolve all of the known worlds, Shiva swallows the poison and it turns his throat blue, but he's able to kind of neutralize or transform or alchemize the poison. It's very important to recognize that, you know, that it's not like the poison just goes away. He says a mantra and it dissolves, or a magic wand. You know, the law of karma even applies to the gods, in that he swallows it, he does something, and it changes him just as much as he changes it. And so the yogi is always one who's working with inner alchemy. And one of the first things that comes up in our practice is often poison, whether that's like dealing with some limitation or ache or pain in the body, or dealing with some type of mental, emotional challenges, or even just the sheer frustration of being really bad at something, right? Because no one, no matter their physical ability, steps into the yoga room a raw beginner and kind of a clumsy, ugly duckling in a way, because yoga is quite extraordinary, right? It is nothing that we do in that room is common or simple. Even a pose that's become iconic, like downward facing dog, is actually very complex. And so the yogi is one who is able to transform, transmute, and alchemize even the most difficult and poisonous of situations and circumstances. And this conversation about poison and inner alchemy led me to want to talk about the law of karma. And, you know, karma in the yoga tradition, very complex, very deep rabbit hole. But that led me to that article by Harish about samskaras and how we all have these imprints, these impressions, these kind of patterns, or sometimes they're called triggers, so that when something from the environment comes in, we have a response to it. And sometimes the response is out of proportion to what's coming in. For example, like, this is a personal one. It's kind of funny, but it's also kind of sad. So I got June, right? And some of you know that my last dog passed away because she got an autoimmune condition. She got an inflammatory brain disease, and it was very horrific and traumatic. And she passed away when she got sick when she was about 2, and then passed a few months later when she was about 2.5. So that was obviously sad, and, you know, happened like 5 years ago, right? So this wasn't like last year. This was 5 years ago. And I knew that was like a traumatic and difficult experience for me, but what's been funny is like having June like brings up all the like conditioning and the trigger around it. So now I'm a little bit paranoid, which is interesting to look at, right? Like anything she like does that might signal like a health problem, I like kind of start freaking out a little bit. Like like I could totally become one of those hypochondriac people at the vet, you know, that's like there every day. And they're like, oh, it's that lady again, you know? If I didn't have a lot of awareness around it, I'd be like, okay, you're worried that she's coughing because your other dog got sick. You know, she probably just swallowed her water wrong. You know, but it's a trigger now that I didn't even know was there. I knew it was there, but like not like it is, right? I had no clue until the new kind of environmental factor of a puppy, another dog, came into my life. Interesting, right? So that's what this idea of samskaras is all about, is like some of these imprints are there and you don't even know they're there until some type of environmental factor comes in that would trigger them or stir them up or expose them. And that's what Harish means in that karma, when he says that karma is just something that happens that gives you the opportunity to work with the samskara. So part of the practice, and even one of the goals of practice in this tradition, is they don't describe the goal as enlightenment. They're more likely to describe the goal as liberation, as some type of freedom, which then begs the question, freedom from what? And the freedom here would refer to freedom from mental constructs, freedom from stories that kind of bind you and trip you up, and freedom from these samskaras, these imprints that get triggered whenever the environmental factors kind of come in and wash over those imprints. So then the work of the practice becomes untying these social, cultural conditionings that keep us bound, unraveling the mental constructs and stories about who we are that don't serve us, but also, you know, unbinding ourselves from the things that keep us from seeing reality as it is. So this goes back to avidya, misperception, misseeing, being kind of the root cause of suffering. And then all of the practice is designed to create liberation from suffering, from the things that keep us bound and stuck and limited, and help liberate us and free us and open us up to more of our innate nature or our essence nature, our ground of being. And those concepts, essence nature, innate nature, ground of being, spark of divinity, what are other words for it? Consciousness, Brahma, Atman, you know, there's infinite words to describe kind of this essence nature or your true self with a capital S. You know, there's lots of ways to describe it in the yoga tradition. And I find that using words from the yoga tradition can be really helpful, because some of the words that we have from our society and culture, or maybe the religion of our upbringing, can be a trigger, right? And can create binding versus liberation. So we next need to talk about, like, what is this essence nature, ground of being, spark of divinity, true self? What does the tradition mean by that? And basically what the tradition is pointing at, and all the words, you know, there's a great saying, don't mistake the finger for the moon. All the words are just trying to point you in the direction. So it becomes also like a tool in that use the words that help you gain clarity and gain connection. And the words don't matter so much either, because they are, in a way, always insufficient and inadequate. So ground of being, that's probably my favorite word to describe this kind of consciousness, awareness, soul, spirit, true self, because it gives me a sense of something that's very solid and something that is the beginning and that from which everything else arises. Essence nature was something that really rang true for a while as well, just because it represents to me the part of the spirit or the soul that's essential, the first thing, the primordial thing, the thing that's before all other things, the thing from which everything else is built. Over time, those have become my favorite ways to describe this aspect of self that is unchanging and eternal. But years ago, just consciousness worked better, true self worked better, higher self worked better. So the words are plenty, and it's really up to the practitioner to choose the words and phrases that work best for you. And the word or phrase is pointing you in the direction of the awareness that has been peering out from behind your eyes your whole life. The awareness that is unentangled from aversion and attachment. It's like the awareness that watches your dreams. It's not participating, it's not particularly invested in how things play out. It's simply aware of what's happening. And I love Adyashanti, and I think Adyashanti does some of the best descriptions of this kind of true nature, essence nature, and also how you gain contact with it and a relationship with it. And one of the questions people always have is like, how do you know that the voice is the true voice, or how do you know that what you're sensing is your essence nature, not just another aspect of your personality or I maker? Because the I maker and the personality, what we sometimes call the ego, can attach to anything. It can attach to fancy cars and big bank accounts, but it can just as easily attach to spiritual experiences and spiritual identities, or even like humanitarian identities. And then it can kind of hijack those, what we might call more altruistic motives, and conflate them so that they become another story, another mental construct, another narrative of self that keeps you from knowing essence nature or true nature or your ground of being more fully. So people often ask, how do you discern that true self from, the kind of way the personality kind of morphs and adapts to whatever you're doing? And Adyashanti, I'll never forget it, he says, the true self, or the still small voice that's like that inner guide, it's not invested in you taking its opinion or doing kind of what it's guiding you to do. That type of spacious perspective doesn't have an agenda. And that's part of the way we start to sort out what's true self, what's essence nature, what's the still small voice of truth, versus what's more of the same old stuff and more of the I-ness or the personality or the ego. One of the qualities of the ground of being or essence nature is ananda, which is often translated to bliss, but a better translation, and this again comes from Harish, is this idea of deep okayness. And I love that translation because it doesn't have a lot of attachment or aversion to it for most people. And it's something you're not super likely to grip and hold on to, whereas bliss, joy, contentment, or peace, we often have a lot more attachment or aversion to those, a lot more mental constructs and stories, versus this idea of a deep okayness, like ground of being. It has this kind of settling and also a quality of spaciousness so that you can be with whatever's arising. And this idea of being able to be with whatever is arising is almost like an internal ninja yoga skill in terms of the tradition. Because if you're able to be with whatever's arising, you're able to process it, assimilate it, alchemize it, versus the attachment or aversion where you're either grabbing onto it, clinging, or pushing it away, stuffing it down, running from it. So in a way, this like ability to be with whatever's arising is an incredible skill for the yogi, and in a way where the yoga actually begins. Because until then, we're always kind of playing the ping pong match with attachment and aversion. Whereas once we get a sense or even like a little bit of a foothold in that deep okayness where we expand our ability to be present with whatever's arising, then we can actually do some real inner work with triggers, conditioning, samskara, the knee-jerk reactions we have to things, our mental constructs about who we are. But until then, we always kind of end up in that ping pong match, which is, you know, I think even like part of why a lot of people come to yoga is they're like, I'm agitated and I'm frustrated, or I'm it's that itch. You know, as Douglas Brooks would say, you come to yoga because you have a pebble in your shoe. There's something bothering you. There's a rub inside that you just can't sort out. There's an itch you can't scratch. And that's what gets you to the mat, to the meditation cushion, to the practice and the philosophy. So this ability to be with whatever's arising, you know, this also builds upon Harish's kind of 3 main steps for clearing out samskaras or patterns or triggers, opening the energy body, opening the body, deep self-inquiry, and this ability to kind of be with the emotional currents, whatever's arising. And those 3, people mentioned that like they seem to, they weave together, which is almost always true with the yoga tradition. You don't see a lot of like stepping stone type work. It's like they influence one another intimately. And you really have to have some degree of inner awareness and stillness to, it's almost like having a being in the center of the tornado or the hurricane. You need to have some type of connection to your calm core in order to be able to kind of witness and watch the emotional currents that will arise. In a way, you also have to have the discipline, like the discipline to get to the mat and to engage consistently, because that type of connection just requires time. And the sensitivity we develop with the body on the mat, like the awareness of the alignment principle. And one of the things we talked about last session was this 80-20 rule, that you want like 70 to 80% to be a global diffuse body awareness versus 20 to 30 to be more of a focused awareness, because then you can see how any given alignment principle contributes to the whole. That type of inner awareness and sensitivity allows you to stay anchored in more of that spacious, open awareness, even when some type of perhaps intense emotional experience comes into your field. And then you're less likely to kind of get sucked into that any one thing or trigger. You can stay into that space of interesting or a little bit of observation. And it doesn't mean that emotions aren't intense. It doesn't mean that things you experience seem far away, or you're looking at them through a glass, or that things don't impact you or influence you. It just means that you have a little bit more space around them, and that you have more, you're more anchored in that calm center. And I mention that because some of the spiritual bypassing, or the ego, the ahamkara, attaching to some of these principles, what I've seen over the years is that some people become very numb to their feelings. And they believe that that's the way to kind of have that calm center, is to not feel. And it becomes another form of aversion. And it can even be used as like a spiritual badge. Like, this happened and I didn't waver, or I wasn't affected, and that's not what we're after. It's almost like a game we play with, how do you feel everything fully and not be kind of knocked out of that center? And can you do both? And this tradition is big on the both. So, the other thing I had in my notes here at this point was these qualities take time to develop. And I feel like no one ever really says that, because it's so like unglamorous and uncool in a way, that it's like, it's just gonna take discipline and hard work, kids. Like, our culture kind of has this, like, the faster, quicker, the better, and the kind of more exciting it is. But in my experience, this work just takes time, and it happens very gradually. One of the things I often tell my clients, and this is when they come with like physical stuff, like back stuff, is that yoga is not fast, but it's deep. And if you stick with it, the transformation is real and lasting, but it will not be quick. And that type of work for the physical body is one thing, but for the mental and emotional body, it is another. And in the text, there will often be these little mentions of how you can't force the change. It will happen gradually. And the best way I know how to describe this is it's almost like how your palate changes over time. You can't just be like, I'm not going to crave X, Y, and Z anymore. Or I'm not going to like the taste of this food, which I know isn't good for me. Or I want to give up this thing and I'm just going to stop like that. It usually takes time to recalibrate your palate and even what your body is craving. Heather says it's a journey, and there are deep scars or stories to work through and build a self-awareness, not a quick fix or solution. Yes, absolutely. And even like the idea of like taste buds is a good one, because the emotional, the 9 rasas, these 9 emotional flavors that we're going to work with, rasa means like flavor or juice or nectar. And so similarly, what we crave in terms of emotional flavors, similar to what we crave with food, often takes time to change and recalibrate. That being said, the time and effort, in my experience, is well worth it. Well worth it from every vantage point, because you really get to rewrite your story. So the 9 rasas, I'm going to get to them in just a moment, but to really understand them, we also have to understand the gunas. And I'm going to take you guys through something very quickly, briefly, called there's a big map of cosmology in this tradition called the 36 tattvas. And it's basically like, one of the questions the yogis were asking is like, how does this spark of divinity, or how does this essence nature come into being? Like, how in a way do you get the genie into the bottle? How does God become you? How does the one become the many? What happens between like oneness and humanness? And so the way they describe how that occurs is this kind of map of cosmology called the 36 tattvas. And basically you have oneness, pure consciousness and energy. And that oneness, pure consciousness and energy, travels down through Maya. We can translate Maya to the magic mirror. And Maya comes from the root word to like measure. So it kind of measures things out, partials things out. And it's almost like the best metaphor I've come up with is when consciousness passes through Maya, it's like pure light going through a prism. And when the pure light exits the prism, then it becomes different colors. When pure consciousness passes through Maya, then it becomes different forms. It becomes you and me, and where there's oneness absolutely at the very core, there's also differentiation. And because we live in a human body, we live in the relative world, we live in the world of duality. The world of unity is here, but it's fractalized in a way. And that oneness, absolute consciousness, exists before Maya. Just like you can't get the pure light kind of back to pure light once it's passed through the prism. Now you've got colors. Similar with consciousness passing through Maya. Now you've got a diversity of form, which makes life interesting. And once consciousness passes through Maya, it becomes encased in things like time and space. It becomes encased in like a limited human body that doesn't know everything, can't do everything. Perceives time as linear and as events happening in a fashion of cause and effect. But even within the encasement of limitation, there is that essence of divinity, their true nature, the ground of being. And when you have that ground of being, true nature in the relative world, this is when the tradition calls it jiva, the individual soul. Now, you have the individual soul, jiva or purusha. Purusha is another name for that. And then the individual soul is operating in what's called prakriti, or nature. And nature, all of the material world, everything we can see and perceive and relate to, is made up of the 3 gunas. Guna means thread. And it's like the threads that weave the tapestry of existence. There are 3 gunas. The first one is tamas. And tamas is like darkness, inertia, heaviness. It's also solidity and stability. It's condensing energy. Then you have rajas. Rajas is action, passion, movement, energy, engagement. Sattva is lightness, balance, harmony, integration, connection, organizing intelligence. Now, the gunas, one of the things the mind usually does as soon as it hears the gunas is it starts deciding which ones it likes and wants and which ones it doesn't like. Like tamas, no darkness, no heaviness for me, right? And some of us like love rajas, right? Yeah, give me more of the action and energy and passion and movement. And, you know, I will be completely honest, when I first started practicing, sattva sounded boring. Who wanted lightness, balance, and harmony when you can have action, intensity, and passion, right? But all 3 are necessary. All three exist in all that is. And the yogis aim to create a particular type of relationship with the gunas, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But I'm going to give you a metaphor that I heard from a teacher a while back, and I thought it was fantastic, just to kind of clarify how the gunas exist in everything. If you think about a seed, what makes the seed solid and the seed separate from the soil is tamas. The movement and action and intensity that is growth that will allow the seed to send roots deep down into the earth and sprout a stem and a stalk up to the sky. That action and movement is Rasas. And the organizing intelligence that tells that seed whether it is an oak tree or a tomato plant is Sattva. What creates the equilibrium between roots and stalk and stem is Sattva. So all three play a part. We don't want one without the other. And you know, that kind of attachment or an aversion to some of them is just a mechanism of the mind. So we recognize that, kind of laugh about it, be aware of it, and, swaha, let it go. The relationship yogis want to cultivate with the gunas is one where it's like we always have a backdrop of sattva. And it's almost like a sattva-like quality, that diffuse global awareness we want to cultivate in the body. That's really a quality of sattva and allows us to find sattva, balance, harmony, lightness within any given pose. The things become problematic with the gunas, with our emotions, with our body, when we become stuck somewhere. Life is flow and health is flow. And it's like water. As long as water keeps running. Most of you know I lived in Maui for a while, and I always think of Iao Valley when I tell this story, because Iao Valley has this beautiful little kind of creek, and just the most pristine water, because it's all coming down from the clouds at the top of the mountains, and then the water is filtering through the many, many layers of rock in the mountain, and then coming out towards the bottom to create this stream. And so as long as the water keeps moving and kind of bouncing and going to the ocean, it's crystal clear, so light and bright and almost sparkly. But if the water's diverted and it gets kind of stuck anywhere, then it becomes stagnant, dank, and dark. It becomes putrid in a way. If you have studied any Ayurveda, they talk about amma, this kind of stuckness and gunk that gets accumulated in parts of the body, and that cultivates disease. So health is flow. And that's why being able to allow whatever is arising to kind of rise up within us and move through us is a way to create health in terms of the energy body. So with the gunas, we want to develop a relationship that allows us to be with them and be with the days when we feel heavy and dark and lethargic, as well as the days that we feel energized and enthusiastic and like we really want to get stuff done. And we want to have this backdrop of sattva, of balance, harmony, and awareness. So we're like, oh, I did a lot yesterday, and obviously today my body needs a rest. I need to kind of embrace the tamas. Or like, oh, I had a tamas day yesterday, kind of a darker, heavier, more lethargic day. Time to like really get my shit together and get going today. So it becomes a tool for relating to the energy of your body. And then the 9 rasas are really kind of based on the idea of the different gunas, and then placing, Heather says it's hard to embrace the tamas. It's hard to embrace the tamas because our culture tells us it's bad. So when we feel heavy or dark or inertia or lethargic, or like we just need to lay down and take a nap, most of us have then stories of guilt and laziness, not doing enough. And in a way, it threatens our identity and our value. Most of us received praise, and then we became very attached to doing stuff, especially when we were younger, because that's how we got positive attention, right? So I think it's important to talk about that, because like there are very intense things inside that keep us from embracing some of these qualities or experiences. I'm learning how you can't have the light without the dark. Megan says that. Absolutely. Like we would not really want it to be day all the time. Like that causes all kinds of issues. Just ask the Scandinavian countries. And then there's the trade-off of when you have night almost all day and not day. So, and a lot of it again comes down to cultural conditioning. How we were conditioned to think of light versus dark, of energy. Our culture loves Rajas. Loves it. Praises it. Wants everything to be that. And that's also part of why tamas gets so difficult. But think of it this way too. You can't really have sattva until you can embrace tamas. Because sattva is balance. So until you can really be with that heaviness and lethargy, it's almost like you don't get admitted to the land of sattva. It's like a test, right? And it's like you will remain in the realm of rajas until you can actually embrace tamas too. So these 9 rasas correlate to the gunas. And you're going to judge some of these emotions as bad and some of them as good. Be ready for that. And where this becomes useful is that you can use this as a way, as like a ladder to more of the emotional states that you would like to experience. And also to recognize kind of where you are with other, recognize where you are so that you can do the inner alchemy. For example, as soon as I hear my mind talking about being overwhelmed, that is a alarm system in my awareness. Overwhelm is a very dangerous story for me because it can quickly spin me into realms of depression. And overwhelm, when I investigate what overwhelm means, when I get curious about it, I realize that overwhelm is just me thinking about the future and things I can't control now. And then I'm like, oh, overwhelm. I'm thinking about the future and things I can't control and can't do anything about now. Then I can, once I'm curious, then I can actually take steps to either let it go or do something about it, right? I'm like, okay, I can't, for example, classes, getting back to classes at the school or the studio. As soon as I start thinking about what that's going to look like or what it's going to mean in a month or 4, overwhelm is quick on the heels of that, inquiry. And I can't do anything about a lot of it because I have no idea what the city or the government is going to do in terms of how they're going to regulate, the social distancing or things like wearing masks when you go into any type of building or public space. Does this make sense? So if I try to go there, which I do, right? Overwhelm comes quickly. And if I don't then get out of there, I quickly become depressed or start feeling the emotion of depression. I'm like, this is not very helpful or useful. I don't want to spend my day in this scenery. So I can feel that. I understand what's going on. It makes me sad. It makes me feel like I'm never going to get out of this, blah, blah, blah. Okay, we've been there, and let's move on. Let's not get stuck in this state. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, good. So I'm going to start taking you through the 9 rasas. Rasa means flavor, juice, nectar. Flavor is a really lovely word to use here because it's like a taste. And you want to be able to taste these emotional flavors. And just like a taste, you don't want to linger in them. You don't want to be stuck in them forever. And some of them you'll want to cling on to. But the best thing to realize with any of these emotions or flavors is that health is flow, and moving through them and with them is the best thing we can do. So the 9 rasas, we're going to start at this kind of tamasic, this heavier, darker level. Again, your mind will start to pass judgment. Please resist. Just use these as information. So the tamas, so I have to tell you one more thing. So the gunas then inform the doshas. Gunas and doshas are different. Doshas are like the nature that you have, and it's kapha, pitta, vata. Kapha, water, earth. Pitta, fire. Vata, air. And most of us will have a predominant nature. Again, like the gunas, we all have all 3. But most of us will have one quality that's stronger than the others. And I mention that because these 9 rasas are all categorized according to dosha, and you will also feel probably one category more than others because that's your predominant dosha. That's your kind of predominant thread that runs through your individual nature. Okay, so gunas, doshas, I know it's a lot. Bear with me. So the kind of, all of these are more tamasic in this first category. And the kapha flavor is disgust. And that could also be described as repugnance, self-loathing, heavy depression. It's more kind of rajasic nature, right? So we're moving up in the scale, is compassion. And compassion can be further described as empathy, light sadness. Like sadness that has a little bit of distance between you and the thing. And then the kind of higher vibration of this, the sattva, the more light and balanced and harmonious version, is peace. Which can also be described as calmness, contentment, fulfillment, satisfaction, relaxation. So another way to say this, the heavy version, the tamasic version of kind of this more earthy emotions is when you're feeling disgust, repugnance, self-loathing, heavy depression. The way out of it is compassion. What'll kind of pull you up, what'll give you some energy and momentum out of that is compassion, empathy, to kind of lighten the load a little bit. And eventually we pull that emotion up even farther to create a sense of peace, a sense of calmness, contentment, fulfillment, satisfaction, and relaxation. That's the highest vibration on that spectrum. Now on to the pitta qualities. The low vibration, the kind of more tamasic element, is anger, which can also be described as fury, irritation, violence, hostile rage. That's the lower vibration. Kind of pulling it up is courage, heroism, confidence, pride, the disappointment and agitation that sparks action. And if you think of like the hero's journey, like most heroes don't go on like their crusades because they think it's a good idea. They go because they're mad, right? They go because they're trying to right a wrong. They're trying to find justice. The highest level of this vibration is love. And this can include desire, devotion, admiration. You know, I love when, I think it's Brene Brown talks about how, you know, a lot of times anger is just a boundary violation. Something that is important to you or value to you or a part of what you love or admire or hold sacred has been violated. And so it leads to anger. And again, anger is kind of this low level emotional current. It's not bad. But again, we use this as tools to help pull us into more useful flavors or vibrations of these emotions. So from anger, irritation, agitation, even like rage, we get pulled up by courage, by our willingness to act. And that can eventually lead to devotion and love. Next, on the air end of the spectrum, the low vibration is fear. Worry, anxiety, paranoia, terror, disabling terror. And the way we pull that emotion up is with wonder, curiosity, delight in the mystery. And the higher vibration of fear is joy, exuberance, being able to appreciate the cosmic dance and even find humor in it. So it's like when you're feeling fear, worry, anxiety, if you can zoom out enough to get curious, to kind of wonder at it, to appreciate the mystery and uncertainty that's inherent in life, then you can actually find a thrill or a joy or some excitement in the experience. Has anyone been able to find that with some of the fear and uncertainty around this whole coronavirus thing? Yeah, it's pretty cool, right? And that's also why that kind of dance is actually very healthy, to have the fear and anxiety and then kind of get curious and wonder at the, like I kept saying, the power of Mother Nature. And then it's almost a little bit funny, you know, because you're like, wow, we are so insignificant, us little humans here on this planet. And we think we like run everything and do everything. And then within 3 days, like no one's flying and everyone's staying in their house. Randall says there have been studies done about how awe changes depression. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, one of the reasons like curiosity is such a powerful emotional flavor is because it immediately kind of gives you that opening, right? It has that quality. It's on the sattvic scale, right? And it's on the vata scale. So it creates lightness and opening. And that's also like, in terms of like antidotes, you know, depression is like the low vibration of, you know, tamas and earth. You know, it's about as solid and stuck as you get. And opening up to curiosity and wonder, it brings a lot of lightness and starts kind of pulling you up out of that well. So these are things, this kind of chart, the 9 rasas, were something I learned about years ago, and I can't say like I think about them every day, but they became very useful for helping me identify the flavor or emotional current, to know the pathway for lightening some of these heavier, denser, low vibration emotions. And also to in a way recognize that they were just part of this scale. And that scale implies movement, which implies health. It's not about running away from the things at the bottom. It's not about labeling them as bad. It's about knowing that they're just a vibration, they're just energy, and that you can work with them. And there are tools for lightening the load or creating some movement. How to create movement through the rasas. Carrie, is that a question? Or more of a statement?
No, that's a question. I think I got a question. Yeah, like, and you just said, what are the tools for lightening, right? For lifting up. So that's my...
Yeah. So basically the tool for lightening is knowing the next step. So for example, the depression discussed, the next step is compassion. And that can eventually be transformed, transmuted, lightened even more to peace. Because the thing is, like, most people want to go from like depression to joy. And you can't do that. Like, it's too many steps, too many elements away. So it's kind of more like, this gives you the tool is take the next step. And so the next step from disgust, depression is compassion, empathy. And the next step after that is peace, contentment, fulfillment. The implication is that you want out of the lower vibrations. No, Gray, that's not true, which is why I started this with you're going to pass judgment. It's not that you want out of it, it's that you want to be able to flow with these, and people tend to get stuck at those lower vibrations because they are tamasic, because they have a heaviness and inertia. and because people tend to push them away, stuff them down. It's not about getting away from them or not going there. It's about being able to embrace it, everything, and do the inner alchemy so that you don't get stuck and so that you continue to have the flow that is health. The reason I say moving up or transmuting, and I emphasize that, is because most people do not like to be at those lower levels. But the aversion feeds it. Most of us don't have any issues or stories with feeling peace and joy and love. We have the attachment, we want to stay there for sure, but it doesn't ever happen. And we need to know that too. But we have much more emotional charge and more social cultural conditioning around those lower levels, which is why we need to talk about them more and talk about how to deal with them, because we don't. We're all like, give me more peace, love, and joy, and keep me away from depression and anger and fear. Yet, which ones do you actually spend more time with? Yeah? And that's why this conversation is important. If you're stuck in a lower level, should compassion be sought for the self and or compassion for others helpful too? Likewise with curiosity. Both work. So Ari was basically asking, is the compassion or curiosity for yourself or for others? Both work, and you've got to figure out what works for you. This is also why some, like the metta practice, you guys know the metta meditation, which is like, may all beings, it's like you give blessings to like people close to you that you usually like someone that you have a pleasant relationship with. You don't like start giving blessings to your enemies, because that can be too emotionally charged. But also for most people, giving blessings to themselves can also be difficult. So there's like a whole process of kind of creating compassion that works for a lot of people. But for other people, like for myself, metta practice has never been something I've really gravitated to, partially because the Buddhist tradition's a little outside of my wheelhouse. But for me, compassion for like myself, just softening around the whatever I'm feeling, really powerful. Sounds almost stupidly simple, but changes everything, right? And remember, I have a history of depression, so depression scared me. Anything that even looked like depression or tasted like it a tiny bit, you get like a whiff of it, I was like freaked. Because I'd been so far in that realm, and having compassion around it and compassion around my sadness or my sorrow or my even like stuff like self-loathing. I've talked about how like my practice for a long time was really aggressive. That's like an act of violence to myself in a certain way, and it was fueled by stories of self-loathing, not being enough, needing to be something different than what I was. And as soon as I have compassion around that, things change very, very quickly. And that's kind of what this is all about. Is it's not about running from those low, and I use lower vibration because these are on the tamasic scale. They're heavier, darker. They have more inertia. Because they're heavier, darker, they tend to pull you in and keep you stuck, Those kind of middle vibration, those are the alchemy. Alchemy has to do with fire. It has to do with transformation, destruction, and creation. And then those kind of upper levels, those are kind of the light, balanced sattva. But also just like air, just like vata, light, balanced sattva, it kind of tends to blow like the wind. So those emotions tend to be kind of fleeting. And when you cultivate a deep okayness, you can be with whatever's arising. One of the things I've really noticed during this time, and last year too, when kind of divorce and separation and business stuff was in like full swing, was that I could embrace the sadness and the sorrow and really be with it. And it was actually tremendously healing, because sometimes I actually just needed to be there, and then I could kind of come up out of it. But the running from it definitely perpetuated it. And then it would be like a 5-day event where I was starting to get pretty scared, versus a 2-hour event where I like kind of lay around and feel sorry for myself for a bit, and then we go on with our day. Does this make sense? Yeah. And I really want to be clear on the fact that it's not about not wanting to feel certain things. It's about having tools so you can feel everything and know that these emotions exist on a scale. None of them are scary. None of them are bad. What's problematic is when you become stuck. What's problematic is when you perpetuate the cycles of attachment and aversion. Because that is avidya. That's misperceiving the nature of reality, which is everything's in flow. Everything has the qualities of tamas, rajas, sattva. And the yogi is one who can swallow, who can digest, assimilate, and alchemize even what most people consider poisonous. Megan says, I found compassion to be hugely powerful for me during shelter in place. Kristen Ness has a self-compassion website with all kinds of information and meditations. Awesome. Kristen Neff, if anyone's interested in that. And then Heather says, running from it is exhausting. Yes, running from it is definitely exhausting. And Gray, thanks for asking that question, because I'm sure it was up for a lot of people. And it gave me an opportunity to circle around to it and kind of hit that idea hard, because your mind will totally be like, do its mind thing, which is separate, pull apart, pass judgment, attach aversion, blah, 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 all that, you know? So the goal, goal is flow. Randall says, can you speak, I'm guessing, to dealing with anger more about acting with courage? Can you clarify? There was some...
I was just trying to rewrite it. Can you say more about how to deal with anger through acting with courage, like what that might look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am currently angry about our political situation and how botched some of the response to coronavirus is. So acting with courage would be speaking about that, because there's definitely some stuff in the yoga community that spirituality should not be political. And then acting with courage, you know, even speaking to my family about certain things. My dad is a Republican, which I am like embarrassed to even say. He's a banker from the Midwest, right? And a baby boomer, you know, which I always try to tell my parents, I'm like, your reality and what life looked like for you is very different, like, versus what it looks like for my generation. And I have to say things like, what do you want Benjamin, your grandchild, to have to pay these exorbitant college fees? Like, do you want him to be saddled with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt? Anyways, so this is part of the act. And you can see I get very upset about this. But, so, you know, that's an example of anger, right? And I could walk around all day being angry about that type of stuff. And I did for a large part of my 20s. Acting with courage to me is speaking about that, encouraging political activism in our community in a way that feels appropriate for me, and also talking to people who are close to me about certain things and in ways they can hear it. I would bet we all have family members that we differ with on politics. It's been difficult since 2016 for sure. Absolutely. And I also think that, part of my belief with politics too is you can't ask people to change their minds. You can only change their consciousness. So it's like, in a way, how do you get these people out of their belief that if they get more of the pie, someone else has to have less? that people are lazy and don't deserve help. You know, like, and that's one thing that might happen now is like we can change people's consciousness around some of these ideals. And so that's the thing too, is like, if you're angry, if there's a boundary violation, if you feel rage or frustration or hostility, you know, part of acting with courage, you know, too, is, you know, you can't transmute anger with violence. That's part of what is a teaching here. Because violence is on that same end of the spectrum. Does that make sense? So it's like you have to counter the anger with the courage that's moving you towards love. If it's not moving you towards love and devotion and connection, then you're kind of still bogged down in that lower end of the spectrum. So then, for example, my conversations with my family about, you know, politics or things that I'm angry about in society, they have to move us all to the place of connection and love. Because if they just inspire more anger and violence, I am keeping everything at that tamasic level. Does that make sense? Is that helpful, Randall? Yeah, it's a big task, you know, to kind of keep that in mind. And that's if that's something that your mind is like, I need to know more about that. There's a book. There's a man named Marshall Rosenberg who is the guy behind Nonviolent Communication, and a great being for sure. And he has a little pamphlet called The Surprising Purpose of Anger. And it's a very powerful tool to transmute anger, especially in relationship to others. Okay, in the chat, Lori says, I feel like it takes a lot of courage just to reach out to someone in a positive way when you're angry. Absolutely. That's a really good point. Because you kind of want to, and that's a good example too, because you kind of just want to stay in the like anger, violence, they're wrong realm, right? So even like seeking connection, seeking relationship, moving up there is courageous, and also a lot of friction, a lot of discomfort. Because again, you can stay in that kind of lower vibration of like more anger, more violence, more blame and shame game. And if you're actually acting courageously, you're moving in the direction of love. Megan says, where does the overwhelmed feeling fit in? I guess it also feels hopeless. Yeah, overwhelm to me could fit in that like disgust, heavy depression category. It's somewhere in between like the it's kind of like starting to get down there, and that's why it's such a potent trigger for me, because I know as soon as the overwhelmed stories start coming up, I'm on the way to being buried unless I start invoking the curiosity and wonder that pulls me up towards peace and stillness and contentment. Carrie says, may I tell a quick story of moving from one state to another? Yes, please.
Right. Oh, good. I'm unmuted. Yeah, thank you, because this gave me awareness of something that actually happened yesterday that fits in this context, which is, I'm working in real estate right now, and I'm doing a deal where I'm selling my old family home, and it's my parents' home. And
wow.
Anyway, so there's triggers there just walking in that house, right? Like this is where that happened, this is where that happened, like, and all the shit we're talking about, right? I won't go down that long list. So, but then also trying to detach from that, like, this is just a house, it needs to go, right? And moving through that pretty well. But then, long story short, stuff is coming up around how my parents are conducting themselves, asking me to perform a certain role in a way they have asked me to perform in the past. And then having to engage with another person, the other real estate agent, who's getting quite angry about how this is all going down, right? And me bearing the brunt of that person's anger. And in some ways, they have it rightfully. And then me getting angry both at that person and at my parents, and in some cases at myself, during this whole process going like, this is so fucked up. How did I get myself here? Those, most people are behaving like this, blah, blah, blah. Like really just, it's been intense. This is literally just yesterday. Finally, I just back to acting with courage. I actually picked up the phone, talked to this other person, right? Moving from just being like, oh, I want to kill everyone. And then to okay, let this person kind of unload on me a little. But then also the acting with courage was also to set a boundary with them and say, hey, essentially don't shoot the messenger. Here's my role here. This is what I'm trying to do. I need you to be polite and kind. I need you to speak with me respectfully, and I won't tolerate you acting this way towards me. And then all of a sudden, it's the whole thing started to shift, where they were sort of apologetic and realized, I just talk about creating a little consciousness, oh right, you and I are trying to work together to make this thing happen and move forward. Yes, we have weird factors to deal with, but anyway, I'll just sort of end it there to say and I didn't have the consciousness that was happening until you start to speak about it that way. And I put it on that context of trying to move from one state to another. And essentially, I had to alchemize the poison of the whole situation. And it takes a lot of energy and a lot of awareness and having to go through the emotional states that I didn't want to, right?
Yeah.
Feeling bad about myself, being pissed off at the whole world, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, just thanks for putting a nice frame around that to understand that a little better.
Thank you for sharing. And that's a great story and a great example too of how we can use these scales to understand where we're at and where we want to go. And this in a way becomes how we become yogis, not just on our mats, but in the world. Because you could have done this whole deal with an antagonistic relationship with everyone, with anger, frustration, rage, all of that. And the whole thing could have gone on for a long period of time, but it's I still may. Yeah. And I'm sure we all have our days, right? In those situations. Because of when we have more awareness and we understand kind of the next step to take, the courage that creates connection and relationship, and relationship is on the way to love. And there's it's maybe a project I take on, kind of mapping out more of this scale and all the stops along the way, because, these are 9 flavors that the tradition gives us, but kind of what we could put along the way. And that's Megan was asking, where does overwhelm come? For me, overwhelm is moving down in the direction of depression. We could all kind of suss out what are kind of some different flavors along the route of these major mile markers of the emotions. And again, not because we want to stay away from certain things or we don't want to feel them. The emotions are just energy. They tell us where we're at, and they help guide us to where we want to go. Because, for example, if you didn't feel the anger, you wouldn't know that something wasn't right. And part of what anger lets us know is that there's separation, there's a boundary violation, there's some relationship that is not clear or not harmonious. So then, because we feel it, we can take action to kind of move in the direction of something that's actually what one of my teachers would call more life affirming. And that's kind of the thing too, is that this is just information to help us take that next step and to navigate these experiences we have in the world, and especially the things that, because here's the thing too, is a lot of these really negative emotions have some type of samskara behind them, because stuff's just happening. Like Carrie said, it's just a house, but it's a house with lots of imprints, right? Lots of samskaras. So then it tends to, kind of create these exaggerated reactions, with me and the dog. That I've got a perfectly healthy, wonderful puppy. And because she's a perfectly healthy, wonderful puppy, I have high degrees of paranoia because of a past samskara, you know? So again, like, how do I get out of there? Curiosity and wonder. Like, wow, you know, why am I thinking this? Oh, it relates to that. And then can I lean into the mystery and uncertainty of life? All of this is just pointing me in the direction of how precious life is. And so what it can do, what kind of the silver lining of that is it actually makes me much more present and ability to actually appreciate the joy and the sweetness of simple moments, because I know from past experience that like things can be taken away unexpectedly. So the samskaras, the impressions, the triggers that we have tend to, when the environment, nature washes over them, we tend to have more of these kind of intense, deep, dark, lower vibration emotions. And when we understand the rasas and the scales, we can have we have to have the awareness of what we're feeling, the ability to feel it and recognize it, the discipline, and the what I would call the skill of becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable. And then we can get more uncomfortable and take the next step of like Lori and Carrie both mentioned that like the courage to have a conversation and create connection when all you want to do is be at war with someone is actually quite difficult. And similarly, when your mind is spinning round and around and around with fear, anxiety, and paranoia, it can be extremely difficult to create curiosity and wonder around that. So we use the practice to get more comfortable with being uncomfortable so we can take those steps. And similarly, when we're overwhelmed or feeling the heaviness of depression or sadness, it can be, you know, take every ounce of willpower to move from that into compassion. But as soon as we take those next steps, again, it's actually much easier to go from that kind of middle level up to those higher vibration emotions than it is to get out of those kind of entrenched, darker emotions, because they have that tamasic quality. They have that quality of stuckness and inertia and darkness, right? They have a black hole quality almost, versus the upper level emotions, higher vibration emotions have that kind of easy breezy sattva quality. So almost harder to hang on to as well. And it's important to know that, because we do try to cling to them, but they have that easy breezy light quality. So it's like almost like you appreciate their taste when you get it and know that you always have to let them go. Whew. Crazy, right? Big teachings. I am way over time, and I was worried about material, which always happens when I'm worried about material, that I go way over time. Any final questions? Gray, that was super helpful. Thank you so much. Thank you. Nada? Okay. Dana, do you have a question?
Yeah, just real quick. Just because I never really take notes, but then it got super deep, and I was like, this is really helpful because I like to listen. So, really quick, just 3 words for just these rasas, which is disgust, leads to empathy, peace, right? And then fear. You did fear. I'm missing the middle.
Okay. Yeah. Here's how we'll wrap up. Close your eyes.
Sorry.
It's okay. Close your eyes, and I'm going to take you through it kind of step by step. And I often do this when I give you guys big teachings, and I know it's a lot, because it's one thing to get it mentally, and it's another to, in a way, let it settle inside of you. And then you can carry it with you. these all come from Sanskrit words, so their English translations are always a little bit off. And they're flavors. So feel free to kind of replace the 3 words I'm going to give you with words that work for you. And I would even encourage you to perhaps develop your own emotional scales so that you understand where the different points between these major guideposts are for you. So on the earth, water, kapha end of the spectrum, the lower vibration or tamasic vibration is disgust. And then we move up to compassion and eventually peace. The more fire, pitta oriented emotions at the lower end is anger. We move up through courage to arrive at love. And then the vata, air quality, the lower end of the emotions is fear, worry, anxiety. And to move upward, we invoke curiosity and wonder to eventually arrive at joy, happiness. And this framework, like all frameworks, just a tool to give you perspective, awareness, a spaciousness to all that's arising, so that you become more established in your ground of being, your essence, nature, and you can savor all the flavors of life. And take just a few full deep breaths. And then slowly open your eyes. Carrie actually magically typed all the rasas in the notes in the chat if you all want to look at that really quick. And I will type this out and send to you guys too. Savor the flavors. Yeah, that could be like our tagline. Someone said recently too, I'm feeling good because I'm feeling, and I loved that one too. And Patty asked, did you record this? Yes, I recorded the audio on my iPhone, and I will send that to you. And all the recordings are posted. I kind of put this post up called the Coronavirus Learning Library, and they all do kind of fold into one another. It's been kind of cool to do this because it's definitely has a course-like quality. And thank you to all of you who have been on here. Feel to heal. Yes, I like that, Megan. Thank you to all of you who have been on here week after week. It's such a treat and a treasure to be able to share these deep teachings with you during this time. And I thank you because it's kept me going and it's kept me focused, but I also think it's helped me grow as a teacher, and I appreciate you being here to do that. We can all grow together. Namaste.